My name is Isthier once again. Really happy to be here for you all. I know it's morning here in Rochester. Actually, it's late morning now. It's one of the easier webinars for me, but I know it's a little later in the evening for you all. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. And I've been doing admissions now for about 7 years, almost 7 years. It's almost done now. And I've been doing international admissions. So my own background, I graduated from the University of Rochester in 2011. And I double majored when I was a student there in chemical engineering and Chinese. And that then took me on to graduate school, but then from graduate school, I came back to higher education. And I travel around the world, talking about admissions. Of course, there's not a lot of travel happening now, unfortunately. All of my colleagues very much miss all of our travels and seeing students on the road. But as soon as we're able to, again, we'll be back out on the road. But of course, these virtual opportunities remain. And today I want to share with you, some of the things that will help you prepare an application to a competitive college like the University of Rochester. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the University of Rochester, but I start there not to turn this into a talk about the U of R, but to highlight some of the things that make us different and those same things that you should look at other universities to start understanding what makes all those colleges different and how to find the right kind of college for yourself, right? These are questions that you should be asking throughout the process. To me, the admissions process is a stage where you learn about yourself. By the end, you should be able to express yourself, paint a picture of yourself to the admissions committee. Because if you don't understand what you want, your goals, who you are, then it's really hard for you to then portray that to an admissions committee and have them be convinced that you're an exciting student to admit, right? So I'll go into that introduction, but before I start with anything, I think with the current circumstances in the world and the pandemic, I've been starting every presentation by saying we're here to really help you. We've always been here to help you. Our job is to answer questions, take your emails, support you through the application process. We're not here to make life more difficult for you. Believe it or not, even though admissions rates are selective, we're going to be talking about selective admissions, right? Low admissions rates and things like that. But our job is to help students find the right fit and the right college for them. And in the admissions process, especially with the review process, when we're looking at your transcripts and your documents and the activities that you've done, every single student has a different set of challenges and opportunities that they're given in life. And our job is to put you into that context and given your opportunities and given your challenges, then see how much you've done. And so we're not comparing students across a standard bar and holding you to the same standard, especially when you have now schools that are impacted by closures, entire countries that are shut down for periods of time. Of course, everyone in the world is being impacted right now by COVID. So ironically, I tell students you shouldn't feel at a disadvantage because of the pandemic, because every other student is being impacted by this. But I really want you guys to, be at ease a little bit, not be anxious about this. If certain tests are delayed or certain classes or certain activities are canceled, we're not trying to take that and negatively impact your application. And if you have any questions at all, about Rochester or the admissions process to the US, right, you're always welcome to reach out to me. You're always welcome to reach out to the office. We're here to help you and, add that understanding to your application. If you have special circumstances you want to explain, then of course, we'll add notes to your application and take that into account as we do committee review. So there's a lot to talk about the admissions process. Today's presentation will be a good portion of it, right? But it's not the whole thing. And we have opportunities in the future to connect, but I'll dive into the presentation now. And like I said, I'll start off by talking a little bit about the University of Rochester. Again, I don't want to spend more than 10 minutes on this. And then go into what selective admissions is, the factors that we look at Rochester and at schools like Rochester, but generally at selective schools, what you can expect, the important things that committees are looking for as they shape their class, and things that you can do to help yourself with your application. I will be finishing as well, with some talk of scholarships and financial aid, right? How do students make themselves competitive for those scholarships when they need financial aid, especially to attend. So I'll start with my introduction. The University of Rochester is classified as a medium-sized private residential research university. Right? every word in there, could be changed. It's something that you can be looking for. You can be looking for large colleges, small colleges. You could be looking for, a private school which has lots of resources, but might be a little smaller, but there's more resources per student. You might be looking for a public school, right, which has huge laboratories or facilities maybe, or sports teams, right? You could be looking for a research university that provides those opportunities. You could be looking for a school that provides athletic opportunities or, certain classes or programs. Let me take a break right here real quick. I have my friend, his name is Lev Nikolaevich. It's actually my friend's cat, but he might make an appearance every now and then. And if he meows, that just means he's agreeing with what I'm saying. So remember that. This is the only time he's allowed to walk on the table because I can't do anything about it while I'm presenting. So he's excited. But remember those different criteria, and right now start asking yourself the question, what do you want? Because the biggest mistake people make will be to go and choose some colleges based off of a list, based off of where their friends are applying, based off of what people have told them, right? They'll be like, well, I need to apply to these colleges. Let's find out what each of these colleges wants. And I can tell you right now, if you make a list that way, all of those colleges are going to want very different things. And so you're trying to turn yourself into 5 different people for 5 different colleges, right? And there's going to be some degree of he agrees, right? There's going to be a degree of unnaturalness to each of those applications because you're fitting yourself into a different mold that you might not be. However, if you start making your list by asking yourself, I want these things, which colleges have these things, then when you apply to those colleges, it's going to be very easy. You just have to be yourself. You just have to talk about what you do, right? And your interests and your goals. And those colleges are meant to support those goals and those interests that you have. And you have at least a much, much easier time and higher chances of success for applying to those colleges that you've chosen based upon your interests, goals, and personality. So remember that right now. And as I talk about Rochester, think about all the things that you might like, that you might not like, what different things could you be looking for at other places. But location is a great thing to start with Rochester because we're in New York. And a lot of people immediately jump to New York City. But we're not in New York City. We're actually in the city of Rochester. And that's important to understand when a school says they're near Boston or near New York City, ask them, how far is that? Am I going to be there every weekend? I'm going to live in the city. Am I going to be in a small farm town? Hey, Lev. This is just a really important section, right? And so that's why he's adding all the emphasis. But ask yourself about what kind of location you want to be at, if it even matters to you, right? Rochester is a medium-sized city, so you still have things like a downtown, restaurants, museums. We have our own airport here, but you're not dealing with real urban traffic and living. You're not dealing with high cost of living, right? The expense. On the other hand, you're not in a small rural area as well. There are college towns that are simply the college and then farmland or forest, right, around them. So I think there's no good or bad, right? Rochester is what it is, and every college has different characteristics, and it's really dependent on what you're looking for. Some colleges will be a great fit. Other colleges, some people can't stand being in a very remote area. Some people can't stand being in a city. And whatever student I talk to, they make the justification for their choice. So a couple of standout factors about Rochester. We're a very international university. As you can tell, this is the second time giving my webinar to students in Kazakhstan and the surrounding area in Central Asia. But we travel around the world every year. We bring students from over 120 different countries to our undergraduate body. Here you see some of our total numbers for the university. But almost 30% of our students are international. That's very, very high for the United States. On average, US colleges have 5% international students. If you look at colleges like Rochester, some of the private schools, medium-sized places, you're going to find more of a 10 to 15% international. But that's something important to consider. Oh boy, he's going to knock something off the table there. That's something important to consider as you ask yourself what kind of support resources are available at that university. When you're coming as an international student, first time to the United States, do you want to be somewhere where you have to be very independent and look for resources by yourself? Or Do you want a place that is prepared to offer you that career support, alumni network, global opportunities? Doesn't matter if you're looking for a job afterwards in the US or in Europe or in India or Hong Kong, right? How is the university equipped to support you and your needs throughout your time? But we're very international. We value that international diversity, but most importantly, diversity in how each of you think and how each of you solve problems. You're going to learn the most from the students around you. Remember that. Not from your professors, not from your textbooks, because most of your time is going to be spent with other students, learning with them, doing your homework together, working on projects together. So really ask yourself, who are the students that are coming to the university that I'm applying to? Another big standout factor about Rochester is our open curriculum. We don't have any required classes. We don't have any general education requirements. If you never want to take a math class, we're not going to force you to take a math class. You never want to take a history class. You don't have to take a history class here. If you don't want to take an English class, all of your classes are still offered in English, right? So you still have to work hard, practicing that and preparing for some of those English exams. But we really want students to choose all of their classes and study what they love. And so that first year that a lot of students might expect to have a English, math, science, history requirement and then move on to their major, we don't have any of that. And the students really love that freedom and flexibility. And again, I've talked to students that can't stand that idea of an open curriculum. They want to know what they're going to do. They want a schedule laid out in front of them. And that's perfectly fine. Like I said, the curriculum is one of the top reasons students apply to Rochester, and students applying to the U of R understand that they're going to have that freedom and flexibility of learning. It creates a very exciting learning environment, actually. Finally, the research opportunities, right? I mentioned we are a research university. All of our faculty across the humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences are doing research, and they want undergraduates to get involved in those opportunities. So if you want those out of classroom experiences, applying what you're learning, internships are another element to examine as you look at colleges. But we really work hard to give our undergraduates research opportunities, and that's the second reason. The top two reasons students apply are open curriculum and research opportunities when you think about Rochester. So I'm going to leave it there for now for the university introduction. We have plenty of info sessions that are happening at various times throughout the week that you can sign up for if you want to learn more about the U of R specifically. But today I want to talk about the general selective admissions process. And the best place to start, obviously, is defining what is selective admissions, what is highly selective admissions. Usually when I talk to students and families and we talk about selective, it's less than a 50% admissions rate. So less than half of the applicants that apply to that university are going to be admitted. And the reasons for selectivity vary. I think one of the most shallow reasons for selectivity is reputation. All right, if you see a school that has a 6% admissions rate, you might think it's a very good institution because so many people are trying to get in. But that's probably a logical fallacy. All right, I would challenge you to think about that very carefully. If you see a place with 10% admit rate, it doesn't necessarily mean it has what you need or what you want, right? Or the program that's best for you. However, that's one of the more shallow reasons. I think one of the more concrete reasons that we usually talk about is space, right? There's a certain type of experience that the university wants to offer its students. And sometimes there are space limitations on that. Sometimes there are class size, sometimes there are dorm rooms, space limitations, right? Whatever that is, generally at a selective university, the size of the student body is being limited so that we can offer the best experience in the classroom, opportunities for research, interaction with professors, right? Because if we have 20,000 students who want an opportunity and we only have 4,000 of those opportunities, right? A lot of students are going to be disappointed and dissatisfied with the experience. And the residential component is a part of life at Rochester as well. We only have so many beds, right? We only have 1,400 beds for first-year students, and we require that students live on campus to become part of that university community, to become part of the Rochester family. So we are going to limit how many students are admitted so that we can make sure we can meet that experience expectation that the students have, right? So it's, multiple reasons that a school may be selective, right? Again, the experience is dependent on the size, and that's generally what turns it into a selective experience. Not any correlation necessarily to quality, right? Or reputation, all those things play into it, but it's very, very subjective. Don't just base your evaluation of a university on its admission rate. When you talk about highly selective, you're falling under 30% usually. University of Rochester hovers around 30% admit rate for our applicants. So about a third of our students will be admitted. And there are very, very few highly selective colleges in the US. You know, when we talk about 50 schools being highly selective, that's on 3,500, 4,000 even colleges and community colleges, two-year programs in the United States. So be mindful, don't feel like your options are limited. When you're applying to schools, you might want to have some selective options. You might want to have some less selective options. You'll also have to think about financial aid, right? That's definitely something that we're going to talk about. But that is generally the definition of a selective college. The reality is that it's becoming more and more competitive to apply to college, especially selective universities, as technology has developed, right? The Common App went online just as I was applying to college, now almost 12 years ago, right? I applied in 2007, but you have technology that has made it easier for students to simply click a button and apply to another college, right? Simply submit a short supplemental essay, you have an additional one, instead of mailing all those things out, getting more envelopes and stamps. So the barriers to apply to college have been greatly reduced by the technology that's available. You then have a natural increase in the number of students, right? So you can ask your peers, you yourselves might be applying to a high number of universities, especially if you're looking for financial aid and scholarships as an international student, right? I'm going to jump into that, later on. But I've heard really ridiculous stories, where students have applied to 15 and 20 colleges, but they're really, really working hard to try and get a chance of admission and a chance for funding for college. And it's going to be more challenging, right? But these are simply some numbers that were shared from peers, via NACAC, our admissions professional society. The number of students that are submitting, 7 or more applications is slowly creeping up, right? 3 or more, I'd say the average is probably 3 to 4 for US students. But these show that the numbers are growing there. These are University of Rochester's own numbers, right? This is the growth that we've seen in application numbers. We've shot up towards 20,000 applications a year now. We're looking for a class of 1,400 students. And that means we're going to be admitting about 4,000 to 5,000 students, right? Obviously not everyone we admit is going to decide to come to Rochester. So you have increasing applications, you're trying to stand out amongst a larger and larger pool. How do you do that, right? And I don't want it to seem daunting. And really, I come from an engineering background. I think this plays both ways, right? So don't let these numbers discourage you, right? As more students apply to more schools, what really happens is that each college has less certainty about who's going to come, because if you've applied to 7 schools and you get admitted by more, you suddenly have more options, right? So universities actually have to continue admitting more, and at the end of the day, their admit rate doesn't really change, all right? So I don't want to worry too much about the math behind that, but it is getting more competitive, it is getting a little harder, but I don't think it's as dire as many students and families might think when they look at the initial numbers, right? So I remember that as application numbers go up, the number of students we admit will also go up, even though our admit rate might stay the same or go down a little slightly. Now, when you're applying to a selective university, what are the things that we look at? And again, don't start by picking a college and asking what they look for. You should be starting by asking, what do I want? And then which colleges are looking for these things, right? That's the approach you should take. It should always start from you. And that's our #1 priority. When we talk about our jobs and our office and our responsibilities, our #1 priority is always the student, understanding the student, supporting the student, right? Making sure we can make the admissions decision that is best for the student. A lot of reasons students aren't admitted is often because of fit, and I'll get into that. But the admissions committee is looking for students that fit the college's goals, the programs that we have, and the character right? The character of the university is really revolving around the kinds of students that come. Are you a very collaborative person? Are you very curious, by nature? Do you want to explore? Do you want to try new things? Do you want freedom? Are you undecided or are you very decided, right? Is the curriculum here at Rochester going to make sense for you and your personality? So the reason we look at fit, right, and how well you fit the programs and offerings is because we want you to graduate within 4 years, right? We want you to succeed. So if we admit students who aren't academically prepared, right, they're going to fail out in their first year or maybe hang on desperately and not make it through their second year, right? And we don't want that to happen. That's a waste of money, first of all, for whoever's paying, and it's a waste of your time, and it really, really decreases your chances of succeeding through college later on if you have to re-enroll and start over, all right? So, we're looking for preparation in academics, obviously, alongside those character attributes. So some of the things that are listed on this slide here, I don't like to read off of slides, but some of the things here help us determine your chances of success in persisting at Rochester. You should also be critical of the colleges that you apply to and look at first year retention rates. How many students stayed past their first year, right? And then how many students graduate within 4 years and within 6 years, okay? At Rochester, those numbers are 97% first year retention. And then our 4-year graduation rate is something like 85, it's between 80 and 90%. Our college wishes it was higher, everyone wishes it was always 100%. But I think those are pretty good numbers when you're evaluating college. And you want to think about that. Even if a college, throws $100,000 at you to attend, right? What is your chance of success there? Is it the right place? What kind of opportunities are you going to have? Always think about those decisions before jumping into something. But that's a little bit about fit. We're going to have a committee at a selective university. Depending on the type of school you apply to, there may or may not be faculty on that committee. So you'll have at least an admissions officer looking at your application. They might all review every application individually first, and then all meet as a group of 3 people or a group of 5 people, 10 people, who knows, to go through every application. Depends on the applicant pool size as well. It's really hard for us to do something like that at Rochester where we have 20,000 applications. So what you'll find at a lot of places like Rochester that are selective is that you have a first reader and a second reader process, right? And that first reader is going to be someone like me, right? And I'm responsible for applications coming from Kazakhstan, for example. So every application that comes from Kazakhstan, I'm going to read first because I'm going to take the time to develop my understanding and expertise of the school system in Kazakhstan, what kind of resources you have, right? I'm going to have these connections with the Education USA and understand how they're supporting your application because I want to put you into context, right? Maybe you're not in an IB program because, you can only take your national curriculum classes, right? And I want to understand that, compare you to IB students and AP students and A-level students for that reason. So that first reader really puts you into context and understands you. Finally, a second reader will look at that and they independently make decisions, right? I might say admit, the second reader might say admit as well. And if both readers agree, typically an application decision is set. If they disagree, it goes on to a committee where 3 or more people are going to talk about that application and reconcile the conflicting decisions and the reasons for that conflict. Again, at Rochester, we don't include faculty in our committee. It's going to be all admissions staff. But generally, at a school that does that, it goes past committee. What we're really doing in committee is advocating for a certain decision for a student, right? It's still not final because at the end of the day, at the end of our whole application review season, we spend our whole winter looking at applications. You have 7,000 people who we've advocated for admit, right? But we only have so much space, right? We can only admit 5,000 students for example. So the university is going to have its own priorities as well. Maybe we're looking for certain musical talent. Maybe we're looking for certain athletics teams. Maybe we want to support a certain major program that semester and find a lot of people interested in philosophy, right? And so the admissions office will eventually sort of sculpt that class, and adjust some of those decisions as well. But your key point of engagement, and the point of advocacy and making sure that we understand you is really through that first, second read, the committee process. And I saw a diagram the other day that's actually really, really good. Maybe I can get it and share it with you one day. But there are things that are within your control and things that are outside of your control, all right, in the admissions process. And when you get a negative decision, right, you should never, ever take that as a negative reflection on everything that you've worked hard to achieve and where you've gotten to in life. Oftentimes it's simply there wasn't space, right? Or there was a priority that needed to be met elsewhere in the university. For a lot of students applying for financial aid, right, it's going to be budgetary restrictions. And then we can only admit so many students and make really, really hard decisions on how many students we can fund and who we're going to fund, all right? So we make really, really tough and sad decisions, every year because we have to turn students down for funding that we're really excited about. But there's so many sometimes, all right? So again, today's presentation is really meant to support you and to help you put that best application forward. And there are things that you can control as you're preparing your application. Once you've submitted that application, once you've done your part to engage and done your interviews and everything, don't beat yourself up for it. Don't stress out over it. Let the process play out, okay? And at the end, see what your options are. Now, the factors of admission, I've sort of been talking about these, right? Academics, you have your quantitative credentials, right? You sort of have your academics and your grades. Within your academics, we're going to be looking at rigor, all right? So how have you challenged yourself? If you did have AP classes available at your school, I'm going to know that, right? And I'm going to ask, well, how many did you take? Or did you at least challenge yourself in the areas you're interested in? You don't need to take 20 different AP classes and kill yourself, right? I don't want anyone to do that. But again, if you're in a national curriculum, I'm not looking for AP classes. I'm just simply looking to see how you did because those were your options. That's how limited you were. Your other quantitative credentials, you do have exams and test scores. The University of Rochester is actually a test optional school. So while we look at the SAT, if you submit SAT, ACT scores and want to share those with us, you can also share AP scores and things like that. We don't require them in order to apply, and you can indicate that on your application, what your testing plan is. So keep that in mind. That's a good point to actually talk about test optional. And I think a lot of schools this year will have test optional as an option for you because of the pandemic, right? The SAT has never been international friendly, let's be honest, all right? But this year especially, it's difficult for students across the US as well to take it. And so, Americans being as self-centered as we are, they decided, okay, we're going to be test optional this year and make it easier for people to apply. But I'm really happy, for international students that you're going to have a lot more opportunity to apply to different colleges now without needing to submit really high SAT scores or anything like that, right? What does it mean to be test optional, and when should you submit scores, and what happens if you don't submit scores, right? How's your application viewed? To start with, if you're taking the SAT or the ACT, which you probably will if you can, it never hurts to take that exam and send in good scores for your application. I'm going to tell you that right now, all right? But I will also tell you, right, in my personal opinion of the SAT is that you're never going to take the SAT in college. You're not going to sit down in a classroom and take a test every day that looks like the SAT. So its value in terms of predicting how successful you'll be is very low, but I think the reality is that colleges, look at it and add those scores to their profile, and if you have a good score, definitely use it to your advantage. Now, back to what I was saying. Look at a college profile that you're applying to and see what the middle 50% is for their enrolled students. And the middle 50% SAT scores and ACT scores, all right? Now you have your own SAT score and you look at this middle 50%. If your scores are within that middle 50%, absolutely fine to submit those. You should submit those scores. If they're higher than the middle 50%, of course, submit them. You're meeting the average or better for the students that enroll in that college, right? So that is a good benchmark for students, in my opinion, to use. If you're below that 50%, it's up to you. I can't tell you not to submit them or submit them, but I think you can use your own judgment about what you should do with lower scores, right? And when to submit those to colleges. Now, that's excellent question right here that I'm going to speak to right now is, how do we evaluate academic performance when you don't submit the SAT, right? And that's the alternative path that you take. So when you don't submit your scores, what happens to your application? Well, the review process, first of all, is the same, right? When we're not putting you in a separate batch or anything, we simply don't have test scores to add to the academic evaluation. And so there's more emphasis placed on your academic record, all right? Now, that creates a challenge if you have a transcript that doesn't show us very much rigor, right? Or if you have a transcript that maybe isn't as strong, you know, sometimes if you have, you know, some lower grades on a transcript, but some stronger test scores, that can balance it out. It simply means you don't have those test scores and an opportunity to balance that out as much, right? So speaking from experience, this year we went test optional for the first time. Generally what I've seen is that applications need to have a much stronger academic profile if you're not going to submit test scores, all right, in general. So there is a balance. You know, we understand there are limited opportunities in some cases, and we're not looking to penalize students that have limited opportunities. We're simply looking to make sure that students that have those opportunities aren't getting an easier pass, all right? So if you have opportunities, make sure you're pushing yourself, challenging yourself, performing well. You know, if you choose not to submit test scores, you should still do all those things if you submit test scores, you know, but that's simply a shift in emphasis. We don't have a magical scoring system. You know, I don't say here's 5 points for your transcript, here's 10 points for your essay. We don't do that, okay? But there is this sort of subjective shift in balance that says, well, we're gonna look more at your academic credentials, and if you have any supplementary academic credentials to submit, then do that as well to support your application. I hope that helps, you know, clarify, you know, how does test optional really work? What should you be thinking about? You know, I really hate to see students take the SAT 5 times, 6 times, you know, just to get 30, 40 more points. You take the SAT once, maybe twice if you're trying to get a better score. 30 to 40 more points, you know, even 50 more points isn't going to make that much of a difference in your application at the end of the day, right? So there's testing, transcripts, you know, those sort of speak to your academics. The qualitative aspects are going to help selective universities judge your potential to fit in. And the baseline philosophy is that happy students are successful students, right? So the reason we care so much about fit and matching our character and personality and programs and all this is that when we have what you want, you're going to be happy, you're going to make friends, and that positive mindset is going to help you be more successful when you're actually getting down to do your work and study and get those grades and take those exams, you know, or even find the support that you need to study for exams and prepare for those tests, right? Or even just talk about the material you're learning in, right? And be interested in it and have conversations about it. So we look at those qualitative aspects a lot more than non-selective institutions might, all right? If you're talking about an institution with an 80, 90% admit rate, very unlikely that the essay will have a huge impact, right? You still need to make some effort, right? Because 80, 90% means there are students not being admitted, okay? But it's much more important to pay attention to those essays, you know, how you're portraying your activities, you know, doing an interview when you're applying to a selective university. When we look at your activities, we're really looking for quality over quantity. So I don't want you to feel like your goal is to put 20 different activities on your resume so you can apply to college. If you try 20 different things and that's your personality, go for it. I love it, right? That's exactly what you should be doing in high school and college, trying out lots of things. But over time, you know, as you look through those 20 different things, right, 2 or 3 things are really going to take shape as your most important activities, your most beloved hobbies, right? The things that you're really excited about and that you want to share with others whenever you can. So the 2 elements that I'm looking for in an activity that you share with us is how long have you been doing it? You know, that sustained involvement, not just how long, but how regularly do you do it, right? Maybe it's a summer camp, but you've done it every year for the past 10 years. Maybe it's community service, right? But there's students that do community service for 3 days. You know, their school sent them out to a village, donate some books and come back. and they talk endlessly about community service, even though that's all they've done, right? And there are students who do it every week, every month, right? They're committed to some type of activity in their neighborhood or community, or taking care of their family, you know, and it comes through very naturally. If I asked you to talk about this activity, you could talk about it endlessly for 15 or 20 minutes without me needing to ask you questions. That's the kind of sustained involvement we're looking for. The other thing is how those activities have impacted those around you, right? Do you get others excited about music, you know, or do you just sit by yourself and practice piano and go to competitions every day? Our community at Rochester is really meant to be an engaged community where everyone is doing what everyone else is doing, right? And trying things out and getting involved. So we want you to really highlight those key activities, right? And share those with us. And I see a great question, you know, is it not recommended to fill out all those spots in the Common App? Not what I'm saying at all, right? I still think you should share everything that you've tried, everything that you've done short term, right? That still shows your character and personality. But really highlighting, you know, up top, those 2 or 3 most important things. You know, what are those things that you've had long-term involvement in? You know, it's more important to have a couple of those than to have a full list of activities on your Common App. A couple of great questions here. Let me see. I think another question that I can address right now around that, you know, is how we evaluate the achievements in extracurriculars, right? And there's no passion score or something like that, right? I really go back to long-term involvement, you know, regularly doing something and sharing that with others. Those are the benchmarks that we're going to use, but it's subjective. And remember that everything in your application is going to be looked at by a person, not by a computer. So there's no way to say, okay, their long-term involvement gets a 90% score, but their sharing with others only gets a 20% score. No, you know, at the end of the day, it's how I feel. It's what I understand of that activity that I'm going to make notes about in your application, okay? When we then talk about the pros and cons of that, right? Let's pause for a moment and talk about holistic application review. You know, there's selective application review, but how that's done, you know, we do it in a holistic way. We have people looking at applications, and at the end of the day, that means it's a very subjective process. And the US is the only country that does it this way, all right, in 99% of the cases. We have people looking at applications and making subjective decisions, not based on a certain metric or a score that guarantees a certain decision, all right? I think the vast majority of the world, you take an examination, you get a certain score, that determines your admission. Or you're getting certain grades in high school and you get a GPA, that determines your admission, right? There might be an essay, you know, if you apply to the UK, you're going to have an admissions essay, but it's a very different structured type of essay than what we're looking for in the US. And that essay is, you know, evaluated with metrics, you know, with each section. So the US can be very, very frustrating in terms of understanding why not when you received a decision, you know, if you were admitted or not. And I get it. And I share that frustration sometimes, especially when I'm advocating for a student and it doesn't work out and, you know, we're not really able to tell you why or why not a decision was made a certain way. But in defense of the way admissions is done in the US, what I really think it does, and, you know, we're with Education USA today, so obviously talking about the benefits of US education, but I truly believe holistic admissions review offers more opportunities for students that haven't had a traditional background, that haven't had all the opportunities to do things in a standardized way and take all those exams and get an elite private education, right? Instead, we bring that bar relative to where you are and evaluate you based on how much you've taken advantage of the opportunities you've had. So while it becomes very frustrating and subjective, right, in the evaluation process where I'm basically imposing my opinion on your activities, right, and your essay, and then sharing that onwards with the committee in the future. On the flip side, I can say, hey, this student might not look perfect when you just look at the numbers. Look at all these great reasons we should still advocate for this student and bring them to our community. So I truly believe that it works, right? We don't make the right decision every time. But also, don't worry, I'm not the only person that will read your application, right? We try to iron out those human biases. You know, if I don't like people that eat chocolate ice cream, and then I deny everyone who, you know, eats chocolate ice cream in their application, that's not a very good admissions process, right? So, you know, the second person that reads it isn't going to care about what flavor ice cream you eat. And if that's the reason I made my decision, right, that's going to be wiped out very quickly, okay? So we do our part to wipe out those biases and tendencies in our admissions review as well to sort of minimize that subjectivity, okay? Well, that was a sidebar, right? But I think we talked about your activities, your recommendation letters. Speak to people who know you that can add value to your application, all right? Don't get a letter from someone famous just because they're famous and your uncle knows them and they can sign a recommendation letter for you, right? If that famous person has never really worked with you or only met you for 10 minutes, that letter doesn't really matter to us, right? I have students ask me sometimes, is it better if the principal gives me a letter or if my science teacher gives me a letter, if I'm applying to this major, you know? Some of those are college specific, but in general, a letter from the principal very rarely adds value unless they're really aware of who you are and what you've done in your school, okay? So it can add value, right? Definitely ask your principal for a letter if you feel like they're gonna give you a valuable letter, but those recommendation letters add context and understanding to the short descriptions we see in your activities, right? And your essay and your grades, right? They can talk about why you chose certain classes. They can talk about how you adjusted to a new school environment if you changed halfway through high school, okay? So find recommenders that can really speak to you and demonstrate an understanding of you. We require one from a counselor. You know, if you don't have a counselor at your school, it's okay, you know, get one from another teacher. At least 2 recommendation letters are required at Rochester. Some students try to send, you know, endless recommendations. You know, after 3 or 4 recommendations, a lot of it starts to repeat itself. So you don't have to think about getting too many recommendations. Be nice to your recommenders, you know, especially your counselors and teachers. If you have a lot of students applying to the US from your school, they're gonna have a lot of work in the winter, right? And make things easy for them, help them get the information they need early on and ask them early for those letters. But otherwise, you don't really have to worry about it, right? Be nice. Don't bully other students, and you're going to get a fine recommendation letter. Schools will often welcome community family recommendations as well. It's fine to send those. I'll be honest, at Rochester, we don't require them. It's not a swing factor when we make an admissions decision, right? We simply want to offer you the opportunity if you have a music teacher or a coach. You know, sometimes the parents want to be involved. And if your parents won't leave you alone about your application, then let them write a letter for you and they'll stop asking you questions, right? Because they've shared everything that they want to. But again, think about if that letter is going to add more useful information that's different from the rest of the letters that you've submitted. And then the essay, right? Oh, excuse me. And I think these are actually, these are all the factors here. Before I go to that, I'll talk about the essay. Or I think it's on my next slide. Yes, all right. I'll jump back to a couple of slides, but the essay is meant to talk about yourself and help us understand you, all right? The advice I always start with is to go online, read all the essays that have been written before, and don't write anything that is similar to what you can find on the internet, right? Because 5,000 students are gonna write that story about being bad at basketball or public speaking or their soccer team, you know, wasn't getting along and they were losing all their games, but suddenly I came along and I figured out that the disagreement was about this or our teamwork problem was that. And the next year I became team captain, got everyone to work together. We did training exercises and we won the team championship. I learned about pushing past that failure, perseverance, determination, teamwork, friendship, right? We get a lot of essays like that, you know, along those lines. Guarantee if, you know, you write one of those stories about an activity, we've probably seen it. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that we're looking for an essay about an activity. No, we're looking for an essay about you. And sometimes I get very, very heartfelt stories, you know, from students that aren't about activities, but that tell me a lot about that student's life story. All right, so it is 600 words. You're not going to write your entire autobiography in your essay, you know, and I don't expect something that's going to make me cry at the end, or, you know, something that I want to give a Nobel Prize to at the end. You know, it's 600-word college essay written by a 17, 18-year-old, right? I understand that. So, you know, don't stress out too much over it, but do make an effort to always ask yourself the question, how does this essay make me look different? And how does it make me stand out from my classmates, from other soccer players, from other students in Kazakhstan, right? And being mindful as well. You know, I don't think we have too many applications from Kazakhstan, so that in itself could be, you know, something cool that the university sees. But we do see a lot of applicants from Kazakhstan, right? You know, especially as you're applying for financial aid, you know, you want to be more standout, you know, and help us understand why you're different. So always ask yourself that question. You don't have to answer the question, how am I different from every other person in the world? You know, how am I a unique individual in this world? But look at it from my perspective and understand that I read 20 applications in a day, right? And every time I read, I'm asking myself, well, how is this one different from the other 19 that I've just read? All right? Does it stand out? Does it make me excited? All right? Does it genuinely speak to the student? Is it the student's voice? All right? At the end of the day, the most impressive students are the ones that aren't trying to impress us. And that's profound but true, okay? If you, again, go way back to the beginning and you ask yourself, what do I want? You know, what do I want from the college? Not what does the college want from me? And then you pick your colleges based on what you want. You make your application, you know, you only need to really make one overall application for all your schools. You'll need to tweak supplemental essays, but you present yourself, you put yourself out there. And then if a school doesn't admit you, maybe you weren't the right fit for that school, you wouldn't have been happy there anyway if they had admitted you, right? So don't let that worry you. But if you're confident in who you are, you're gonna put forth an essay that's very genuine, very natural, right? And don't feel like you have to fit a certain model or a standard essay in order to be admitted. You know, in fact, if you break away from those models and standards as much as you can, you're going to help yourself. The only standard I put out there is that it should be about yourself. Don't write about your parents or your grandparents or how much someone has helped you or how much someone inspired you. It's great if Mahatma Gandhi inspired you. He's not applying to the University of Rochester, right? It's you, and I have to learn about you. This essay is where you have some of the most control in your application. You can't go back and change your grades in high school. You take the SAT once or twice, you're not going to know what the questions are in advance, right? Your activities are your activities, whatever you've been doing, but your essay is the point. Right now, if you're in 11th grade, you can start thinking about how you want to shape this and what you want it to say, right? So let me go back a little because I had a great slide here that just, it's a laundry list of factors that the committee might consider. And again, there are so many factors here that you can't control, right? If your parents didn't graduate from Rochester, you're not going to be a legacy applicant, right? And that's totally fine. We don't necessarily have to admit a class that's full of legacy students. That's not our goal, right? But sometimes we see, oh, a student has a connection to Rochester via their parents, you know, via their grandparents. You know, it'll be nice, you know, for them maybe to come to Rochester if they're academically qualified and continue that Rochester tradition. So on the left side, you know, you start off with a lot of the academic indicators, you know, to make sure that you're prepared for academic life at Rochester. And then you move into the things in sort of in the middle, you know, halfway through the list that tell us about fit. And then on the right side are mostly what are called institutional priorities. So again, those things like budget, you know, athletics and music. Maybe we are looking for a student from Kazakhstan that year and we really have to get someone, right? Because we don't have anyone else. Or maybe we're looking for, you know, fewer students from certain countries because we have, you know, 5,000 applications from that country and we simply don't have space. Okay, so I think these are good examples of things that you can do. And I think when the recording is put out, you can always pause it here and think about it. But it's just meant to help you understand, you know, the myriad factors that go into consideration. You know, there's more beyond this. It's sometimes, you know, it's beyond your control, you know, what we're looking at. At other points, you know, there are things that you can influence and help yourself. Just make sure I didn't skip anything really important here, right? Some of these are basic mistakes, you know, to avoid as you're preparing for your application. I talked about academics. You know, if you can challenge yourself, then please do that. You know, take advantage of the rigorous options available to you. If those options aren't available to you, don't panic. And we're going to put you into context again. Answer the questions. So it's amazing how many students don't do this. And really the number one reason students are denied is because their application is incomplete. All right. You know, we get to April 1st and it's like, well, we have to send out our decisions and you haven't been checking your checklist to make sure that everything is submitted. You know, so please do that. Don't assume just because you clicked a button that it made it to our office, that it was filed correctly with your record. All right. Go to your MyRock. Every application process has a portal that you can go and check on. So don't wait for us to email you because yeah, we have some automated emails, but it's not necessarily gonna work, right? Or make it your way. So it really is up to you to make sure things are complete. Understand the university that you're applying to. Again, if you're naturally applying to places that fit your goals and needs, you can share that in your supplement. The supplemental essays, really the question is, why do you want to come here? Why do you want to come to the University of Rochester? Why do you want to come to the UC school? You know, why do you want to come to MIT, right? Whatever it is. They'll have all these fancy questions like, this famous person had this quote, and what do you want to do? And what is your opinion on this? Yeah, whatever. Like, sure, answer that question, but also speak to why you want to attend that university, what you're going to do at that university, how that university is going to support your goals. All right, that's what the supplemental essay is meant to do. That part about how you're making a difference, I already spoke to, you know, how we look at activities and how you're sharing that with others and how you're impacting others and how you're making the world a better place through those activities. All right. And the last piece is, you know, demonstrated interest and understanding. Demonstrated interest is the technical term that tells a college, you know, how to measure your potential for coming if you are admitted, right? So that means if I have two applicants that are exactly the same and one of them is checking their status online every day, if they're emailing us every day, if they visited campus, and the other student hasn't done any of that, statistically speaking, yes, they're more likely to attend if I admit that student. But that's not completely true all the time, right? There's not a very high correlation. So we don't put a huge amount of value on that technical demonstrated interest factor, right? So you shouldn't spend your time every morning logging onto your application portal and checking it just to show us that you're checking on your application. Sure, check on your application, you know, every now and then. I think it's important to make sure the process is moving along. But what I'm really concerned about is demonstrated understanding through the things that you do. You know, your campus visits, you know, might not have, but your virtual visits, you know, attending virtual presentations, emailing our office, browsing our website. How does that then increase your understanding of Rochester or whatever school, right? How does that increase your understanding? And then how do you demonstrate that through your essays, through your interview, you know, the things that you share with us and justify why you're applying to Rochester and why you should be admitted, okay? So the point of demonstrated interest is really to increase that understanding and make sure you're applying to a place that is the right fit for you, right? So it all goes back to demonstrating that fit, okay? So when you're engaging, make sure it's meaningful engagement. I care much more about meaningful engagement than I care about you logging on and sending an email every week, right? But do send emails if you have questions, if you want to understand or clarify something, or if you want to provide more information for your application, all right? And ask the school, do you care about demonstrated interest? Some will flat out say no, we don't care, all right? Some will say yes, we care very much, right? And some might give you a wishy-washy answer that they don't want to really reveal their secrets, all right? So the University of Rochester, it's something that we look at, but in a slightly different way, all right? One of the things I want to leave off there in terms of demonstrated interest and understanding is making sure you do an interview, all right? If you want to apply to a selective university and think about 5 students from your school, for example, are applying to that university. If 2 of them have done an interview and 3 of them haven't done an interview, we immediately have people to zero in on that have demonstrated they're more committed to the university, they're willing to take that time and share more information about themselves with us, right? It's such a simple concept. you have another opportunity to share things that aren't written in your essay, that don't fit into your activities, right? It's 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes that we spend talking with you and thinking about you, right? Just in that interview. And we spend about 20 minutes reading your application, all right? So you've doubled the time that we spend thinking about you simply by doing an interview, all right? And we really go out of our way to make these opportunities accessible, right? Make sure you go online and register for an interview. If you are a junior right now and you're applying to Rochester next year, go online and register for an interview. Any college that offers you the opportunity to interview, absolutely do it, all right? Because at the end of the day, we're gonna be choosing from 100 students. Those are very hard decisions to make. If 20 of them have interviewed, you know, we're gonna start zeroing in on those students. And again, we simply have more information on those students that have interviewed. Interviews typically aren't hard, all right? I'm not here to ask you stupid questions like what kind of tree you wanna be or which bicycle part you would be. I wanna learn about you. Again, it's gonna be about what you do, your life, your story. I guarantee I'm gonna ask you why you wanna come to Rochester. So be prepared when you're interviewing with a school for that question. But beyond that, I don't have a list of test questions, right? You don't need to understand Rochester's history and all of our programs, you know, understand the salient points to your own goals and ambitions. You know, tips here are helpful, you know, dress decently, don't wear a torn t-shirt or anything like that. I don't expect you to wear a suit or a tie or even a blazer, all right? We're all very nice people in the admissions office, right? And even if you're not really sold on doing an interview with me today, you know, we have many, many other people that can do an interview. So really relax, you know, our goal is to make it a conversation, not a test, and bring some questions of your own as well, you know, try to take advantage of that opportunity to learn about the university as well, you know. So a couple things about the admissions process. I know I've already hit an hour, so I'll definitely leave time for questions. You know, I'm here as long as you guys still have time. Early decision versus regular decision or early action, right? So early decision is an option that exists, and how it ends up working out is that you commit to attend a university if they admit you. That means you have 100% yield potential from the university's perspective, right? So maybe it's okay if your academics or test scores are a little softer than the average for that school, right? That's essentially what happens. We don't admit everyone early decision. You know, we're still pretty selective with early decision applicants. About 30 to 40% of our students who apply ED are admitted through that plan. So there are still several students who aren't, you know, necessarily qualified or not the best fit that are applying early decision. But typically you'll see that profile is a bit softer. So it could advantage you, you know, at some schools to apply early decision, but you should be very, very cautious about that. One, for several reasons. The most basic reason is that you can't change your mind, right? Once you've been admitted early decision, you have to go to that school. So you have to do your research really early on and make sure that that's the place you'll be happy at for 4 years, no questions about it, okay? Because if you're unhappy afterwards, you're gonna have to go through the transfer process a year later, you might be stuck there, you know. The other important thing to think about applying early decision is financial aid, right? Need-based financial aid and scholarships. Will a school meet your financial aid and demonstrated need, or will they admit you early decision and then you're stuck paying for something that you can't afford, all right? Understand a school's financial commitments to you if you apply early decision and you end up being locked into that agreement. Are they actually going to give you the money that you need, all right? I've seen many students over the years in very unfortunate situations where, you know, either they, you know, are stuck and they withdrew all their decisions from other schools without realizing that the college they're going to go to won't give them financial aid, right? And now it's too late for them to reapply to schools. I've also seen students who, you know, their families aren't necessarily financially needy, but they want a certain amount of scholarships and they don't get it. And they're very upset about that situation, all right? So, you know, talk through clearly with the admissions office, with your counselor, with your family, you know, what does early decision mean to you and should you do it, right? It could advantage you in some ways, you know, if you're 110% sure you want to apply somewhere, for sure, go to early decision, but just make sure those needs are met, all right? So I want to talk about financial aid. Oh, these are just numbers. Um, Scholarships and financial aid. And this is a reality that I think most of our international students have to address when they're applying to college, because there's some degree of financial need. It doesn't matter if you need $5,000 or if you need $50,000 in order to afford the university that you're applying to. If you don't get that money, you can't attend. It doesn't matter if you're admitted, it doesn't matter if you're an all-star student and you get the happiest admissions letter ever, right? At the end of the day, I know a lot of decisions are going to swing on this. So prepare yourself and understand that international students applying, so non-US citizens, right, or permanent residents, if you're a non-US citizen applying for need-based financial aid to college in the United States, it's going to be a challenging uphill battle in your application process, all right? And you have to be on top of your application. You have to work a little bit harder to make yourself stand out for that. Because here's the situation. There are first understand certain terms: need blind, need aware, right? And then demonstrated need, whether they meet that or not. Need blind means that a school looks at your application, doesn't care if you have money or not, all right? Need aware means that we are looking at those financial circumstances as we make admissions decisions, all right? Now, why do we do that? And Rochester is need aware. There are very, very few need blind schools in the United States, all right? Now, when you are need aware, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it still means that there's potential for scholarships and financial aid at that school, right? The University of Rochester, we are need aware because we have a limited budget for need-based financial aid to give to our international students, right? And that's simple fiscal responsibility. We don't want to admit 100, a couple years ago, there was a school that admitted 50 students from Nepal and then realized once they all accepted their admissions offer that they didn't have the scholarship money for those students. And so they had to cancel those admissions offers. Very, very unfortunate situation for those students, right? So, being responsible, we want to say, we have this much money to support 20, 30 students, right? So we have to look at your financial need as we're admitting you to make sure that if we admit you, we can give you the dollars to attend. Because at Rochester, we guarantee to meet the full demonstrated need for any students that are admitted, right? So check that. When you apply to college, they could be need blind, they could be need aware, right? That makes it sometimes more or less competitive. But regardless of that, will they meet your full demonstrated financial need? If they don't, that means they might gap you. They might give you a small scholarship, but then you still need $20,000 more. So what's the point, right? So if they gap you, that's not a really ideal situation for you either. And so you want to be looking for schools, that less important is need blind, need aware. More important is whether or not they'll meet your full demonstrated need. Demonstrated need is different from demonstrated want, okay? And this is very important to understand. You are required to submit the CSS profile when you're applying for need-based financial aid. And this gives us a snapshot of how much you can afford, how much your family can afford to pay for college, all right? And that snapshot is then out of your control because you have a certain amount of money in your bank accounts, your assets, your families earn a certain amount of money, right? You can't submit a number and lie, right? And say, oh, we don't have this money, right? Because it's not allowed, okay? So, but you can't hide money and then say, well, I have $100,000 in this bank account, but I don't want to use it to pay for college. We're really asking, well, why not, right? We are limited in the aid that we can award because there are rules as well. There's rules that the university has in place. There's rules that the government has in place. If we see that you have funds to support college, we have to then assume that you use those funds to pay for college. So understand that when you submit the CS profile, make sure you fill it out accurately. We also provide webinars at the University of Rochester on how to submit that CSS profile as an international student. So if you need one of those webinars, I think several of you may have attended before as well. We're happy to offer those in the future as well. But it's important that you submit that information accurately so that we aren't giving you too little money as well, right? Don't accidentally say you have $100,000 if you don't have it, because some students might feel they'll be unable to get admitted at a need-aware school if they say they don't have money. And it's true, it's going to be harder if you need financial aid. But if we admit you and find out afterwards that you don't have money, we can't give it to you. All right. So it's important to be honest, especially in that part of your application. Now, there are different kinds of financial aid. I've been talking about need-based financial aid, right, which consists of really grants and maybe very small bit of loans, work, study, but money that you don't have to give back really to the university. And that's solely dependent on how much you need, right? There are also merit scholarships, and these are independent, right? So students that need money, students that don't need money are eligible for merit scholarships. And these scholarships are based on your academic achievements, your activities, everything that I've been talking about earlier in your application. That's how we determine merit scholarships at the University of Rochester. So typically, if you need $50,000 to attend the University of Rochester, we cost $70,000. Actually, $80,000 is the cost of attendance this year, including plane tickets, books, and all that stuff. But if you can only afford $20,000, you need to meet that gap, right? And it's typically going to be with a combination of merit scholarships and need-based financial aid. Let me pause for a moment about that financial aid. I was just thinking of something and it left my mind. Anyway, you get that gap met, all right? And at the end of the day, I think the reality is, even with need-based financial aid for international students, it is also going to be competitive based on those same criteria that we use for merit awards, right? Simply because the financial aid budget for US students comes from the federal government, right? So you can admit as many as you want, and the federal government doesn't care about your high school GPA or things necessarily. But when we only are able to support 20 or 30 very high need international students, it really does become important. Are your academics strong? How do you stand out in your activities, in your essay, and have you interviewed or not? All right, so that really becomes part of the conversation across your merit-based and need-based financial aid. Every institution is different. Really have to do your research in this regard and understand how each institution is offering aid or not. All right, so hopefully that covers a lot of that. I have seen some questions coming in. Great questions about ED. Thank you for answering that, Roshan. It is restrictive, right? So you can only apply to one place early decision. You'll also hear early action as an application plan, and that sometimes is restrictive, sometimes isn't restrictive. It's a little more complicated. The whole point is, though, you can apply early to those schools, hear your decision earlier, but you're not bound to those schools, right? So early action is different from early decision. Remember that. If you apply early action, really the expectation only is that you get your decision earlier, but you still have time to review your offers that you get later on. All right. If you get enrolled, no, it's enough to have recommendations from colleagues. Oh, an interesting question from someone who's graduated 10 years ago. So if you're applying to undergraduate and you've graduated a while ago, or even if you're applying to graduate school, I don't know if the question is actually undergrad or graduate related. Absolutely, looking for recommendations from colleagues. Usually we hope for at least one that can speak to an academic experience. And at a place like Rochester, so here's my advice. If you're a non-traditional student and you've been out of school for several years, applying to selective and highly selective institutions might actually end up being a bit challenging, all right? Because those kinds of institutions are looking for that degree of academic preparedness, all right? So while some exceptions are made, especially for people that have been serving in the military, maybe even doing some learning in the military, usually those are for 2 or 3 year terms. When you start talking about 5 years, 6 years, 10 years out of school, the more appropriate route that I advise those students to take is to look at community colleges in the US. And those are 2-year colleges, right? The intent is that you enroll at a community college, complete 2 years of coursework. You've demonstrated success with college level coursework at that institution, and you can apply as a transfer student to many selective colleges afterwards, right? Or to another 4-year institution where you can complete that bachelor's degree. There's pros and cons to that plan, right? But community colleges are much cheaper, right? Much more affordable than most highly selective, expensive private institutions. Again, you might not get as much financial aid later on to attend a selective institution, but there are plenty of great options for 4-year schools after you complete a community college. Yes. All right. Roshan has a good, and if you have any other questions at this point, please feel free to send them. But I've alluded to, in some ways, the holistic application review process that we have at the University of Rochester, and how it's intended to put students into their context. So you might be coming from a huge city like Almaty, right? Where you have, a lot of resources, you have some of the best schools in the country, you have support resources like Education USA, you can practice maybe English with a foreigner that's living in town, every now and then. And then you have students that are coming from more traditional national schools. You have students that are in much farther remote areas, right? That don't have access to as many resources. And what a holistic application process means is that we're putting you into that context, all right? And understanding, well, if you haven't had all those resources, it doesn't make sense for us to expect you to have put those in your application, all right? And instead, we say, all right, here's a student in a large city, all right? We expect them to be performing, at a high level here, right? But if you have a student maybe more rural, at a different school, that hasn't had those opportunities and they're here, we're not looking for you to be here, right? Maybe you're here, right? Maybe you're here, right? But again, that's the idea of that relative scale, right? And putting students into their context, right? And understanding the opportunities you've had, the challenges you've faced. And then when you come to Rochester, right, your opportunities aren't going to be here, not going to be here, they're going to be here, right? You're going to have so many resources and so many things to do. And your challenges, our goal is to remove those challenges when you come to the University of Rochester as well. So when you have those challenges and opportunities removed, what is your potential for success at the University of Rochester, right? All right, someone wants to see the page where we look at some of those factors. I think this is the one that people were referring to, right? And again, use these as examples. This isn't specific to the University of Rochester either, and I don't have this checklist as I'm reading applications, but these are some examples of things that institutions can look at. Another question. So can you apply to 2 or more universities for early action? Good question. It depends on where you apply for early action. Some universities will allow you to apply to multiple places early action. Some universities say no, you can only do one place early action. The Ivy League is a great example of this. If you apply to Yale early action, you can only apply to one place early action, right? They have what's called restrictive early action. On the other hand, if you apply to another university, I don't know what example to use, but some schools might say you can apply early action, you can also apply wherever you want early action. Regardless of whether or not you can apply to multiple places, early action is non-binding. So even if you're admitted to that place, you don't have to attend afterwards, all right? You can make your decision later on. Very good question. So GPA and SAT, right? The question is, do we have to take the SAT or not? The simple answer at the University of Rochester is no, right? We don't require the SAT. We're test optional. The more complicated answer is that you're probably going to take the SAT, right? There's no pass-fail score with the SAT, right? You're graded on a sliding scale. And we will look at those scores if you submit them. If you don't submit them, we won't, all right? So make sure you really look at the middle 50% that a school has for their SAT, ACT scores. If you feel those scores will support you, then send them in. If you don't feel they'll support you, you don't have to send them in. All right. And Roshan remembers my presentation from next year, right? Where I spent a lot of time actually talking about the University of Rochester. So cognitive diversity, right? This is something specific to the University of Rochester. And we're trying to build a community at the university that's obviously internationally very diverse, but what we're really focusing on is cognitive diversity, all right? What this refers to is differences in how you solve problems and differences in how you think, right? And this is something that really plays into your application, when I ask, how are you different? A lot of students, when they think about that, think it's going to come down to their culture, right? Their traditions that they can share with campus. I'll join a cultural club, but that's not quite what we're looking for, right? When we talk about the Rochester community, we have a place where you meet students in the lunchroom, the dorm room, the library, your classroom, and each of you have a different perspective or opinion on something, right? If you're talking about cell phones, for example, you want to work on cell phones? Sure, go ahead and be an electrical engineering major, a computer science major, but they're not the ones who are going to make this great device that works and is really nice to use, because programmers make things that are very easy for them to use. They understand how to use it. No one else understands how to use it. So you need to work together with people from different backgrounds, right? You need the design majors, first to make the user interface look nice, but also to make the device look nice, right? You need to make all that hardware fit into something that looks appealing. You need your anthropology majors and your psychology majors who can understand how do people learn how to use these devices, right? If you've ever tried teaching your grandparents or your parents how to use a phone, right? Sometimes there are very, very frustrating challenges, right? You're like, why don't you just get this? But that plays into how something is designed, right? And how easy it is to learn. Will different cultures accept a vaccine if you're in medicine? Will different cultures accept a new political resolution to a conflict, right? You need those anthropology and psychology majors. And then you also need the business majors, the marketing majors, right? To make sure people can sell this. But the value of cognitive diversity is cultivating a student and a person that always asks questions and that is willing to put forth different ideas, right? And challenge the conventional way of thinking. So what that means is when you make a product, someone's sitting in the Apple boardroom and they learned their basic supply and demand in economics. Great. If you want to sell more, you make it cheaper. But why? Why do we need to make it cheaper? We could make more money if we made it more expensive every time. And that is what somebody decided to do, right? It's like, what if we do make this more expensive every time? And instead, we create a cult around these Apple products, right? And now look at what you did. You have people lining up outside the store every time a new product is released, and they need to get more of it, even though they bought the past 5 iPhones for the past 6 months, right? How can you do things differently and better? We want you to meet people who have a different perspective than yourself, different religion, different socioeconomic background, different political viewpoints. Of course, culture and language play into that. But you're going to come and be in a political science classroom where they're talking about Middle Eastern conflict. And instead of simply learning about that from a professor who has a degree and you're reading news articles about it, you're going to sit next to students from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, from Israel, Turkey, Russia, right? And have all of those students talk about their understanding and perspectives on Middle Eastern conflict and even their experience, as we talk to our Syrian refugees that are on campus. And the value that creates is that you're constantly challenged, right? You've grown up a certain way, you understand things to be a certain way, and you're like, wow, someone else does it differently. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, right? Instead, do some work to understand why people do differently and why people think differently, and then work together with those people, right? To come up with a better solution, a stronger solution, or, maybe you disagree on certain things, but you still work together to solve all these problems. We have a campus that's very welcoming and very open-minded, right? And it doesn't matter if you disagree. 2 people can disagree on something and still be really, really good friends with each other, right? And have lunch together after arguing for 2 hours. So that's the campus environment that we're trying to build at Rochester when we talk about community and cognitive diversity, right? It's not just about being from a different country and a different culture, right? But really, what is your background? What is your identity? How did you grow up? What are your opinions on things? Those are the things that are going to contribute to our learning experience here on campus, right? So let me see what other questions we have. Or if there's anything else Rashan would like me to share. We have one question about, all right, so one question, it is very difficult for international students to enroll in college due to competition. So I think the correct is to get admitted, right? Because of the competition. If you plan to apply for financial aid, it makes things even more challenging, okay? And the question really is, how do you prepare the best application to get admitted and to receive a financial aid package? Really, all the things that I've talked about today, they're intended to have you understand what we're looking for so that you can build that application, right? So do your research, right? Ask yourself what kind of school you're looking for. Don't simply apply to, there are also lots of opportunities, think about less well-known schools as well. There's brand name, there's brand recognition. Everyone's heard of Harvard and Yale and Stanford and, even Rochester. But there are a lot of schools out there that can give you a quality education that would love to have an international student on their campus, that will fund you, that a lot fewer people are applying to as well, all right? And so working hard to find those places that still offer you the financial aid that you need, right? Might not have as large of an international population, right? And so desire that, right? If they're supporting that population, they obviously desire that international population. Some of those places might also give you, better chances of getting into a place that suits you with financial aid in the US, all right? So, by all means apply to selective institutions like Rochester. Again, it's very, very competitive, right? Even some of the strongest, most qualified applications might not be admitted, but I think you have to really round out your college list, right? Don't only apply to highly, highly selective places. Apply to less selective places that might still have financial aid scholarships, or that might be within an affordability range for you and your family, right? I think that's helpful as well. Are we a private university and do you have to pay for study? Yes, we are a private institution. And between us and you, we meet the full demonstrated need. But if students are able to contribute to the cost of attendance, we do ask students to contribute. And then one very specific question about astronomy and astrophysics. Really cool department, right? I wasn't a physics major myself. I had several friends who were physics majors. We have an observatory about 45 minutes away from campus, but this is our own observatory. Our students get involved in astrophysics research. Sometimes they discover a star and they get to name it whatever they want. But more often there's research going on around black holes. Our physics professors are involved with research at CERN. Discovering the Higgs boson, high energy density physics. We actually have a laboratory for laser energetics on campus. Two of the most powerful ultraviolet lasers in the country. So scientists come from around the world to use those lasers. They're looking for sustained fusion, right? Understanding of sustained fusion and what happens at that high energy and high density states. But the real cool thing is that undergraduates can take advantage of research opportunities at the laser lab. So that's enough about that, though. I don't think everyone here is interested in physics today, so I don't want to spend too much time. And I know it is getting late for you guys. I want to very quickly share, a couple resources. Obviously, email us. I will share with my email address as well in the chat. So let me just type that in here. You can always email me whenever you want. And the University of Rochester throughout the summer is offering virtual workshops on all of these topics here. You can visit our website or shoot me an email if you have any trouble finding it. Again, many of these are meant to be general, not necessarily specific to the University of Rochester. So if you enjoyed some of what you heard today, again, I stole some of my slides today from the selective admissions workshop. But if you're really wondering how to make that best essay, or you want to hear more about the interview, or you want to hear more about Rochester, right, and an info session about Rochester, go ahead and sign up for those events that are happening. Otherwise, that's my last slide. I hope you keep in touch. Thank you again very, very much for staying up late. Again, stay well, stay safe. We're here to support everyone through this pandemic and beyond. And we really, really look forward to having students on campus in the fall, and we look forward to your application and hopefully seeing some of you at